Hey gang, I'm Will.
And Chase is who I am, and welcome back to That's Just WAC.
Villains.
They exist.
People love to love them and hate to hate them.
Here in the real world, we have many villains.
And we hate them, but we
True.
love the fictional ones. All your Lokis and your Homelanders and your Tumblr sexy men, like the Onceler.
You have no idea.
We love it. We just love it.
But that's not why we're here. We are going to be talking about villains, but today we're going to be taking our favorite, maybe, D&D villains and casting them instead, flipping the script for a cast of heroes, a heroic party.
Now, everybody who's played D&D for any amount of time has thought about, what if you were to play an evil character? Some of you have maybe done that, but the idea's always lingered. What would happen if you played in a campaign where everyone was evil? Most of the time it doesn't work, because those evil people are going to likely not trust each other, backstab each other, and you can't really be a good and proper party unless you lay out some very specific rules. But what if you could play a villainous hero?
What if you actually could fix them? Right?
You just fix them. You always fix them up real quick.
Today we're going to be going through the different typical party roles, the tank, the healer, and we'll be taking various villains and just kind of plugging them in and going over why they probably would be in that role. And maybe even going over what class and subclass they would be. And if they need a race change from, say, a not playable thing to a semi-close playable thing.
Right. So, if you were to take these villains from your Dungeons and Dragons campaigns, how would you make them villains or playable? How would you make them playable in a party? You let us know down in the comments. We're going to talk to you about just a few of them right now.
So,
what are we kicking off with?
I think it's the easiest to kick off with our tank.
Okay.
There aren't a lot of big main villains who are just people in armor.
True. There's a lot more either Titanus monsters or spellcasters, because typically they can do a lot worse to a party than a single individual can. What do we have for options for a tank on our party?
So the first one that a lot of people would think about is Lord Soth. Now, I personally am trying to avoid, we have not yet played in our group the Shadow of the Dragon Queen campaign.
With plans to do so soon.
Correct. So we've been avoiding spoilers for what exactly Lord Soth is, but at the very least we know he was once a noble knight of Solamnia, fallen and became a death knight. Technically per 5th edition, Warduke, an older D&D villain, kind of like your classic mercenary, sword and shield, more of a barbarian type, doesn't wear a whole lot of armor. But those are two of the main tanks. There are some you could argue could be filling out that tank role. We know Strahd von Zarevich does have decent strength to pull up a sword.
Strahd's an interesting one for this sort of thing.
He has the heavy armor from both the animated armor that he has, that I believe is a set of plate armor.
Correct.
But those are kind of the main three contenders.
We'll start off with Soth as one to talk about. I say we leave Strahd towards later on because he's got a lot of options, to say the least, given his lore.
Sure.
Lord Soth, you're going to want high strength to be able to wear the heavier armor. You're going to need the con to be able to take the hits so you can fight well on the front lines. As far as we're aware, once again, having not read the book so that we haven't spoiled ourselves on it, he's going to be human. You're going to want to put those physical stats, strength and con, very high. Doesn't strike me as an extremely charismatic fellow.
Well, he does need to lead an army. And that typically,
I'll take back what I said.
That typically would be a more charismatic thing, such as like a paladin. Warduke is a pretty simple one. That'd be more of like a fighter, maybe with some barbarian levels. Doesn't wear a whole lot of armor in most of his art depictions. So strength and con need to be high. Dex, decent. I would say his soft stats probably aren't the best. Wisdom, maybe a bit higher. Intelligence, not the highest, since he is more of a hired gun than a big master evil planner. And then there's everyone's favorite, I can fix him, Strahd von Zarevich.
If you're trying to play Strahd as accurately as you can, you'll want to use the Dampier race so that you can actually have some of that undeath vampire-ness to it, because you can't really play an actual vampire in D&D 5e, not with the given rules anyways. Strahd's an interesting one because per his lore, he starts off as a warrior, a conqueror, taking lands, taking names, and he doesn't seem to notably have any kind of magic. But we know that as he settles into Barovia, invites his family over, people die along the way, he turns to magic as a sort of new thing to study, something else to learn. And it ends up leading him to the Dark Powers, which is how he ends up becoming a vampire. So Strahd's still got to have some amount of magic if you want to build him accurately. But this leaves you a decent number of options available. You can start off with the Conqueror Strahd and go Conquest Paladin. He is extremely charismatic, so that would work out well. You'd have the strength and the charisma there. You could go with something more akin to an Eldritch Knight, if you want to pull back a little bit on the religiousness of his powers, given he's not exactly a religious individual. He just happens to stumble into dark powers. But if we're talking dark powers, you can't ignore the possibility of going with something like a Hexblade Warlock.
True.
They've got the opportunity to use some armors. It might not be the heavy armor, but it's going to use his charisma for his ability to attack, and it invokes those dark powers that have made him what he is today. I think your other potential option, the lesser one, he does intentionally seek out and study magic. So you could go with some kind of wizard, but I don't think it'd work out super well.
Well, we're also casting our tank, and warlocks and wizards aren't typically the best tanks.
That's true,
To be fair.
though the Hexblade Warlock does do a pretty decent job of it right around the time you hit level 10.
It can, but that takes a bit of time. If we're looking
True.
for tanking right off the bat, I think something like Paladin. Paladin or Fighter or Barbarian are going to be your best tanks in this role. And so who do we want to cast as our first?
I'll say we'll put down the one that I'm at least a little bit more familiar with, and we'll go Lord Soth. He fits the role the best, I think, for being a classic tank.
So-
And as a leader of an army, he'd work out well for being, as the tank is sometimes considered to be your party's lead, your party's face. Depends on how you build him, of course, but...
And Lord Soth most likely would be more of a conquest paladin, being able to strike fear into his enemies on the battlefield. Let's go and get our blast and cast out of the way.
Okay.
There's a lot more blast and cast characters out there.
Right.
Blast and cast, you obviously have well-known ones like Vecna, Acererak, both liches, which would be hard to translate to playing. And
Those two would certainly be intriguing. As liches, a lot of their magic is things like Blight, Disintegrate,
True.
a lot of good, heavy single target damage. But most of what you really want in a blast caster is the ability to take out the minions. You want somebody with Fireball, Lightning Bolt, Firestorm to be able to take out waves of enemies.
I think one of the best, just for that, would probably be Manshun from Waterdeep Dragon Heist. It is an actual just human wizard, most likely due to his whole clone fiasco / just his innate nature. I would say illusion wizard, even though if you look at his stat block, doesn't have a lot of illusion spells, but he is known for the clones and the mirror image and such.
I think one that would work very well for a typical blast and caster, one who can do good with AoE, I'd have to toss out Oral, the Frost Maiden. She has a lot of ice power. She is the Frost Maiden. She is a god, a demigod, whatever you want to classify her as. And innately, though she's got a few different forms, a lot of her stat blocks come with cold damage. Whether it's abilities, moves, actions that are similar to cantrips like Ray of Frost or Frostbite, or if you're looking at your bigger spells, something akin to Cone of Cold or Odaluk's Freezing Spear. All of those would be in her repertoire. Cone of Cold's one of the biggest AoE cones in the game, and Odaluk's Freezing Spear is pretty high damage for its level, given its size. So both would work out really well. If you're playing Oral, you probably have to look at playing something
Like an Asimar.
Asmar, I'd say maybe even an Owlin would be kind of fun, given how she depicts herself sometimes. There are a couple ways you could go. You could go with the more evocation wizard. There's not really any sorcerers that specialize. You could go dragon soul.
That would give you the resistance to cold damage.
You get cold. It could work. It'd be fine. You could go evocation wizard and just be able to blast and cast with technically any type, just picking a lot of cold damage. But I think one thing that would work really well would be to go druid, because as a higher being, you can expect pretty good any soft stat. I mean, good stats all around, but soft stats should be on the higher side. And that druid, they get a lot of your nature elemental damage type spells, especially with the 1D&D.
There's also the land, if we're talking 5th edition, the Arctic land.
Right. And you can go with Circle of the Land, go Arctic, which I'm quite certain has Cone of Cold as one of its 5th level spells. And if it doesn't, Wizards, why did you do this?
It sounds like we want to throw our blast and cast as an oral.
I think that would be a good one.
Well, there's the much needed support role.
Okay, so we're talking...
Which, while our druid can have support spells, I guess in this case our druid is not really preparing support spells. What villains would go in the support category?
Now, of course, that's a tough question, because support is not something you want in a BBEG.
Correct.
It's a very intriguing thing to be if what you're doing is helping other people fight. You have to be a part of a group at that point, and it makes for a stranger final battle, to say the least. I think the first one that comes to my mind, and this would be an odd way to play them, but I could see it working out in some unique ways, would actually be Murgaxor from Strixhaven, a Curriculum of Chaos. Now, from the lore, Murgaxor comes from the College of Witherbloom, which does a lot of studying of life and death. Depending on how much you want to twist Murgaxor's personality, you could pull a full 180 and have him spend a lot of time studying life. But one of the unique spells that comes from that campaign, Wither and Bloom, allows you to deal damage to a small group of enemies while healing an ally. So it would make total sense for him to have access to that, and a lot of other deal damage and heal kind of spells, something akin to Vampiric Touch. He'd likely have access to stuff like Death Ward to keep his friends alive. If they had hit 0 HP, let him live on 1 instead. It would be an interesting choice to do for support, but I think it could work. Do you have anyone you think would work well as a support villain hero?
It'd be an interesting villain, to be fair. A mostly support-based cleric or bard who is focusing on, oh, I have all these minions who are going to take out the party. I just don't have to get my hands dirty in a way. But there's just not a lot of those in 5th edition from campaigns that we're super aware of the villains from. There could be some minor villains who were like that. But I think Murgaxor could be an interesting one. So I'd be willing to put him as what the question. I guess if he's a Witherbloom, it would make the most sense. He'd be more of a cleric or a wisdom-based caster.
I mean, there are a couple of ways you can go. Wisdom would be one option, but of course anyone at Strixhaven is doing some studying. I wouldn't make him Warlock, Bard, or Sorcerer. A Charisma-based caster doesn't make too much sense. But I'd say he'd probably work best as something like a Death or a Grave Cleric would fit him the best.
I'm going to go Grave just because Death is more about killing than...
It's true. It is very...
Helping those who died depart.
Death Cleric does come from the Dungeon Master's Guide as a villainous character's option. It doesn't have to be that way, but if you're going to be the support, Grave does a lot better at support than a Death Cleric does.
Right, we got Tank, Blast, and Cast, Support. Next one that most people think would be kind of ranged. Just as Skill Monkey, almost any class nowadays can have a lot of skills, and there are feats that give you a lot as well.
Any class can, but to be a good and proper skill monkey, you probably want to be taking a couple of expertises with you too.
Sure, we're talking about ranged right now.
Well, yeah, but I mean, you're just tossing that off to the side, so.
I think for this we should look at more of that ranged single target damage.
Right.
Something like a warlock, class wise, with like Eldritch Blast mostly being their main source of damage output, or looking at like Vecna or a Serac, who have a lot of those like blight type spells where it's like a lot of damage, only one single target though.
Right. Now, you could easily do either of those two, the two most notable liches to ever exist within Dungeons & Dragons lore. Vecna being sort of the top dog, having achieved godhood, losing it, becoming a lich. Whole process there.
Starring in one of the most controversial Stranger Things seasons.
And then you've got a Serac who's known to be a little bit less straightforward, I'd say. He likes to be a little bit more tricky, likes to toy with his prey. He's maybe a little bit more cruel in that regard.
He also doesn't really make himself known, really, until the end. Whereas Vecna's a lot more... You could argue Vecna is more of a charisma, has higher charisma.
I'd say that's fair.
For instance. We do know Vecna did, because he had a whole army, given his lore.
So if you were looking at Vecna, you might want to do something like a sorcerer or a warlock.
Well, he's a lich.
Yeah.
Wizard.
I mean, sure, but you just said he's higher in charisma. I was going to say wizard could be your Serac if you want to have two different options.
We also don't have a wizard as of now.
I mean, true, but not every party needs a wizard.
But we do.
They're handy.
But we do need that intelligence.
True.
We have charisma, strength, we have wisdom, and we have wisdom.
True.
We need that intelligence. I think we should look at the wizard with more focusing on that blight type of spells.
Yes. And either of those can play that role. I mean, they're both extremely intelligent. So
if you want to still have the idea of Vecna leading some sort of army, if from his old lore, then necromancy would give him the ability to have a whole army of undead.
Right.
Keeping it thematically in line with his being a lich.
I honestly wouldn't suggest anything different if you were eyeing a Serac. I'd maybe just suggest changing up the way you distribute your stats. Make a Serac a little bit less charismatic. Maybe a bit more wisdom, maybe a bit more... Would he be higher in strength or con, do you think?
I think they'd be the same.
Okay. Then maybe just switching your charisma and wisdoms around.
Yeah.
But I mean, necromancy would work out extremely well. If you're familiar with Tomb of Annihilation, here's your spoiler warning now for a Serac. His entire thing he's setting up is he's trying to create a new god of death. He's trying to create one, starting with, the baby, the Atropol, and trying to feed it a whole bunch of souls so it can grow powerful, become the death god he wants it to be. So he kind of just has control and has raised a death god. And this is just a little side project for a Serac. The book basically says he found it one day and was like, this would be cool to try out. Let's see how it goes. So, I mean, you're definitely looking at a necromancy wizard if you're trying to raise a new death god.
Sounds like we're going to do...
I'd say we're a bit more on the wisdom side. So yeah, let's do Vecna here.
Vecna.
As our necromancy wizard. At the current state, we have characters who are high in strength, charisma, intelligence, wisdom. Right now, we are lacking anyone who is very good at
everything.
Dex. Anyone who's good at everything. You're going to want somebody on your team who can utilize Dex well, because every team should have at least one person who can do stealth. Every team needs somebody who can attack from a distance with weapons, sneak around, and pick locks. I mean, you're going to encounter locked doors in your campaign, and I don't think any of these people can pick locks very well. Now, they might have spells to knock them open, but if you're trying to stay quiet, trying to stay stealthy, I don't think any of them are going to do that.
No, the paladin can definitely stealth and open the door.
I mean, who knows? Maybe Lord Soth has some nice adamantine mithril armor, and just not have disadvantage on his stealth checks.
But, I mean, if we're talking skill monkey, there's only, that I can think of, one real skill monkey type villain, and that is Jarlaxle.
Jarlaxle Baneray.
The pirate.
We were just talking about the team being a little bit more wisdom heavy than charisma, but if you're playing Jarlaxle, be prepared to shift the balance in the party a little bit towards that charisma side. Jarlaxle, the drow, captain of, I'm going to butcher the pronunciation here, Bragan Dertart.
How's that sound?
Terrible.
I'm not going to try.
He's not going to try.
The pirates.
leader of this pirate crew of Drow. He is an extremely charismatic individual.
He's trying to get on the Lord's Alliance too.
Trying to join the Lord's Alliance for a city, Luskin, just to be able to help his town out. He's not really that much of a villain, but he will screw your party over. So he's pretty mean.
He wasn't much of a villain with our dungeon master.
I mean, that's true. He could be played in a different way.
I could see him being very much played as more of like a crime lord sort of leader rather than a charismatic / sneaky type of leader.
But a great liar with a silver tongue. Jarlaxle is not only dexterous, great at stealth and sleight of hand. He fights well with a rapier in his hands. He might not be the best bow user, but you could switch it up a little if you wanted.
Could.
And that sort of leads us directly towards playing Jarlaxle as a swashbuckler rogue. Jarlaxle's going to come in and cover all your dex and charisma skills, no question, giving you a pretty darn well-rounded out party.
Now, these aren't definitive.
Obviously not.
You could take Strahd and put him as the paladin, multi-class him into sorcerer to get those things like, wow, he has the ability to cast fireball.
Right.
You could cast Oral as more of your support or ranged. It doesn't really... You do you. We obviously didn't touch near all of the campaigns. There are so many of them.
There are a lot of substitutions you could make. This list doesn't actually include Strahd as one of your options, but he'd come in great as like a multi-classed paladin, sorcerer, warlock, whatever you want to do. He's got options. You could roll in and do Manshoon instead of one of these characters. Manshoon has a lot of illusion, which might lower your party's need for stealth. So you might not need your same kind of skill monkey if you can sneak by people just because they can't see you because of your illusion abilities. We also didn't cover anyone that's not really a humanoid.
No.
We might have undeads and gods, but they all kind of fit the bill fairly easily.
They were humanoid adjacent enough.
But we don't have any Tiamats. We don't have any Xanathars.
No.
We don't have any demon princes.
No.
They could all be very interesting build if you were to get some homebrew races, but if you're thinking, who would be a good support villain? Xanathar. All of the beholders I raise pretty much are charm, frighten, paralyze, a bunch of debuffing stuff. He works great as a captain with a bunch of minions with him. So, you could definitely do some interesting stuff there, but it would take a bit of finagling on the rules.
Just imagine going to your dungeon master, be like, oh, what class do you want to play? I was thinking I have a bard. Oh, okay, that's interesting. Good support. We don't have that yet. What race? Can I play, and just pull up the picture of like the beholder. Can I play this? How are you going to do that?
It's like, okay, I have an idea, right? A dragonborn. Okay, but please no, not again. They have 5 heads. Don't do this to me.
But hey, maybe we could do that in another video if you're interested, that is.
Leave a like, comment down below if you think you'd like to see how you could possibly build any of these less human villains in a D&D campaign. Put them into a party.
Yeah, and don't forget to come back because we have more on the way. Maybe a sequel to this video.
And never forget,
That's
just WAC. We'll see you next time.
Stole my line.
Deal.